Managing information security. Some of the key ones that you can see here, that certainly the privacy legislation started to impact IT and how it manages access to information. The IT audit as well articulated specific needs, and within IT audit, as you probably know, these types of findings sometimes work their way through the governance structure all the way to the Board of Trustees. The Board of Trustees starts to give specific instructions to the administration and the faculty in terms of how we would like to see some of these things progress. So the mandate for the Information Security Office covered central IT and all IT units on campus. It's important to understand that because from a perspective of governance and also from a perspective of coverage in terms of how information security needed to evolve on our campus. Okay, the issue statements. With a little bit of the context that I gave you before, and some of the initial conversations and assessments that we did early on, we came up with some of those as-is statements. And what we wanted to do is specify specific things that we wanted to understand what's the current state on the ground. Certainly, little awareness in terms of information security strategically and operational. The culture was very difficult to work with in terms of resistance to change, as a lot of people felt that they were actually overworked with a lot of demands from the different faculty units and from the campus. And there was little trust between the center of the central IT department and the faculty IT. There was a lot of tension at the time between those two. And every time you speak to different people at the faculties or different people in the center, there's always that constant tension that existed. And the IT and business functions were autonomous. As you know, on our campuses, autonomy is valued a lot by a lot of people who work on campus, especially the distributed IT units, and they also work in closed silos. What I mean specifically by closed silos, there was no flow of communication in relation between silo A and silo B. In fact, even within the central department, we had 7 departments. Each department still worked in one specific silo. Okay. So the challenge. So with that backdrop and that context, how do we engage the campus? How do we start to impact people and behavior and norms? How do we establish information security as well in that environment? That was quite a challenge. However, the context is really important to keep in mind in terms of how we want to proceed. Okay, the objectives. Now, with the backdrop that I gave you earlier in terms of the privacy legislation coming in, the audit findings that the Board of Trustees was pushing to establish on campus, in addition to various variables, certainly allowed us to align together in terms of what are some of the objectives that we wanted to start out with. So, awareness for information security is one of the key areas that we wanted to establish. The role that was done at the time, my role, was just beginning. There was no role before that. And we need to make sure that we advise people of what that role is and what it can be. And that was fundamental because I would, for example, be coming in on a certain faculty unit, discussing information security or discussing risks in relation to information security and their data and infrastructure. And people would be asking, why are you here? You're working in that particular unit, so why are you coming to talk to me about that? And it was really fundamental that they start to think of the broader perspective that the university was taking on. Establish trusted relationships and partnerships, and that's in any information security capacity, it is very important to establish those. It doesn't matter actually what the culture is, whether we're working for a factory or a commercial setting. I came in from the private sector, but in any setting, there has to be a level of that trust and that relationship that you need to establish and engage. Now, I couldn't stress that more for our academic settings, environments, because it goes to the heart of the academic setting itself. Influence and change norms and culture with respect to information security, but I want to tie that up to the last one here in relation to perception and impact of the organizational change. Some of you may have been through some of these major projects and IT implementations on campuses, such as taking on ERP implementations. And you can imagine the organizational impact in terms of, if not managed well, how that could really create a lot of challenge for you in terms of your journey on that space. Information security is not any different. At the time, I was the first one brought in, and I wanted to make sure that we understand what that impact is, and also manage perceptions in relation to that, and be sensitive to how we need to manage and proceed on our campus. And establishing a risk-aware culture. And that was one of the key outcomes that we wanted to also measure at the end, is how do we make sure that it's not reliant on a specific role or a specific person, but it actually lives as a process at the same time. So these are the objectives that we set out for ourselves, but keep in mind the backdrop that I gave you earlier in terms of the various drivers as well. Okay, the approach. Like everything else, there is a larger picture in relation to information security. And you'll notice that on every campus, there is some form of a strategy that gets developed. Now, I'm not going to delve into the bigger picture. From here, I'm actually honing in on just how do we establish, how do we engage, how do we meet that challenge of engaging our constituents on our campus? And how do we create those trusted relationships that we need to spin off in order to establish information security? So we start by developing relationships. And like any human relationship, once you meet the person, you start that relationship, you move towards developing trust in that relationship. Trust is built on that first outcome of meeting and talking and communicating. And then from there, we sought opportunities to actually establish this partnership. And I'm going to show you in the next few steps that we took how that kind of worked out in the steps that we took in establishing the security community practice techniques. Okay, the first step, we wanted to make sure that we have support from the top. At the time, we were lucky because the previous director and CIO had worked with the senior management and deans to establish what's called an IT oversight committee. And that helped us to start that conversation there to attain and establish the tone at the top when we needed to move forward on the different faculties and departments that exist in relation to information. Certainly, that conversation with the vice principals and deans, central IT management, department heads, was an extensive consultation, but also an extensive education and awareness. And in that conversation, to advise of the role, advise of information security, advise of risks in relation to information security, and start that conversation. The second step, we actually set up a general meeting. Once we identified all these people, even in the departments and the administration, we set up a general meeting for all of them, and we sat down in an auditorium similar to this. We had about 74 people. If you look at it, when I first started out, it was about 45 to 50 IT units represented in those 74. And one of the things that I really clued in early on, and I was lucky with that, and that two-way communication was critical in terms of establishing those relationships. So what I mean by that is I wasn't there just to be a talking head. I wasn't there just to say, I'm going to tell you what you need to do. I was there to speak and also listen and have the two-way conversation and understand from their perspective what they also want to accomplish. A lot of times when you create securities, there's something called a common purpose that we need to align around, and that goes to the heart of the two-way communication is really important. This is an example of the agenda that we started out with. As you can see here, there are specific aspects of how we're going to establish communication. Now, how many people, just a show of hands, find that communication is an issue on campus? Almost unanimous. It's an art and a science. And one of the key things we wanted to focus on is how do we facilitate that communication that need to happen as a group together. The terms of reference was also to understand, for us to understand, as a group, we were like 74 people in many departments. How do we all align on where we want to try, where we want to go? And we wanted to understand that, but not just from my perspective, but also from the perspectives of people on the ground, to tackle things so they can say, I know what's in it for me, and I know how I can contribute to the same. Okay, the third step, we identified the terms of reference, and that really was fundamental in terms of how we wanted to see each other. And I'm going to show you a little bit of what it means. If you look at here, collaboration was one of the key areas that we wanted in the mandate itself of the group. Collaborative environment that we wanted to establish. This was fundamentally not something that I brought to the table. They actually brought that themselves to the table. There was a foundation where a lot of people really wanted to reach out to each other, but there was no forum somehow to establish and have that reach out to start. The second part was specific objectives that we wanted to be part of the whole environment and how we're going to function. You probably heard on the conference here a few things. Some of them enterprise architecture, some of them strategy. In any development of enterprise architecture or strategy or information security, you always need to define objectives, but you also need to align and have acceptance of those objectives with all the other people that you need to in order to succeed with that. Now, one of the things, as you can see here, it actually does speak to the various elements of collaboration where people can one, seek opportunities for collaboration. They can actually understand what the best practices are, develop a forum to seek advice from each other, and to share information. And one of the key things that I noticed as we started out was people were asking, for example, oh, you have that particular skill set, and I'm just starting. Can we talk? Another conversation. Oh, you're starting with that particular technology? I'm also starting it here. Can we talk? It gave visibility not only from a skill level, but also allowed people to reach out to each other, even though they were in different groups. So as part of the objectives, this was kind of in the back of people's minds, and we early on established that as an objective for the group. And the membership, in addition to the faculty, we actually were good in faculty and staff in that membership. And we added to that membership the hospitals. We have 2 teaching hospitals, and we wanted to make sure we also established relationships with those hospitals. In fact, we also reached out to RMC because I was also part of a group at RMC at Royal Military College, but also prior to me coming on board, but also we wanted to reach out to the Royal Military College being part of that community as well. So the fourth step that we took was we established communication tools. And as you can see here, different departments contributed. So we had the School of Business coming on with some of their technologies. We had Central IT that also came in with some of their technologies that allowed us to create various forms of collaboration in terms of wikis, secure file sharing, listservs, so that we know to communicate with each other and allow for that free flow of communication that needed to happen. The fifth step was conduct a survey. Now we wanted, as 74 people were in the audience, we wanted to know how do we focus? What is the approach we need to take to make sure we focus on specific topics that we want to tackle? And we did so as part of the conversation. The consensus was, let's run a survey. Let's try to run a survey. Everyone will say what some of the key areas that we want to focus on. Have a look at the example of the results of the survey that we did at the time. You might think that it's all, like it touches partially on process. So if you look at that example, change configuration management. I don't know if you can see that one. Change configuration management, I'll read a few. Identity and access, disaster recovery, secure network design, risk assessments, and so forth. A lot of these were outcomes from the people themselves. They actually wanted to speak and find what is the best practice in relation to all of these types of areas. But it touches also on privacy, impact of the legislation, HIPAA and FIPA as well on IT specifically. People wanted to understand what that meant to them in their own settings. So with that survey, we moved towards establishing what's called the focus groups. And one of the things that was really beneficial for us is not everyone is comfortable in speaking when there's 74 people are in the room. A lot of people, you feel more comfortable with smaller groups. They actually are very, very smart people, but they just don't feel comfortable talking to bigger groups. In addition to that, smaller groups are easier to handle, and we can deliver outcomes. It allowed us to move towards focus groups specific within the larger group to tackle the specific topics that we want to tackle right away. And as you can see here, the leadership was provided from different departments. Residents stepped in for a leadership position in certain area, advancement, school of business, medicine, central IT. There was all together in tackling those particular topics for the focus groups. That was the sixth step that we took, and with the focus groups, they continued to meet regularly, and they continued to deliberate and focus on their own terms of reference in order to actually come with a deliverable that can be brought back to the community. And that was one of the things that was very successful, is that people aligned on, yeah, we need to go back to the community. We're not working together just to come up with something for ourselves. We need to go back, not just to the community you said it before, but also to the people they interact with. So when people went back to their own departments, they actually spoke to other people at the same time. And that spread the message all across campus in the different units and departments. For me, I wanted to make sure, at least at the same time, that we continue that momentum and to drive that continuously, but also measure outcomes in terms of where we're going. So what were some of those outcomes, and how do they map to the objectives that we started with initially? At this particular stage of the presentation, I want to just take you back to the backdrop. The backdrop, there was a lot of drivers in relation to legislation, audit findings, information security governance, various areas that we want to drive. The community and the ability to walk through the 6 steps that we walked through to establish that community, allow for that free flow of communication, allow for that relationship and trust to build up between not only the individual members, but also between the center and those individual units. It created a healthy environment for a lot of these people to function, but also provided outcomes as a result of that. So, what are some of those? If you can see here, one of the key areas that we wanted to accomplish was we tell people what the role of information security officer at the starting point, what his mandate, and what he wants to do. And being with an institution that brought in somebody who has that level of coverage for the first time on campus, that was quite a change. A lot of people were struck by why is this structure happening in an academic setting? And we managed to map with that particular outcome to the objective, as you can see here. The second is we created a community, and that was one of the most beautiful things that happened, because it allowed people to have a shared purpose when they looked at information security, but also allowed them to create trust and relationships with each other that transcended just the topic, that transcended just looking at the risk, and also as that risk relates to their own self. We all worked at Queens, but if you look at the closed silos of how we were, everybody was like their own organization. It allowed us to try to understand we all work for the same organization. And staff were reaching out to help each other. And that was fundamental because the skill is not easy to find, especially in a place like Kingston, Ontario, where it was difficult and still difficult to attract specific skills, especially in relation to IT, and allow people to help each other and infuse skills as they collaborated together. Some people were at this stage of development, some were in the lower stage, and it allowed them to offset each other and help each other. And the reason I mapped this to establish trusted relationships and partnerships, we actually saw specific outcomes come out of that in those partnerships. We actually saw real partnerships created between the central IT department and many of those faculties. The center started taking on a lot of those technologies that were a part of the center that the faculty units, could not handle and had the expertise in the center. It allowed for those collaborations to start, but also allowed for getting closer to that healthy balance you need to strike. But also, those conversations that I spoke about earlier is that IT duplications. But just a show of hands, how many people still have different IT or different technologies or the same technologies implemented by several units on campus? Just show of hands. Yeah, duplication of technology was rampant and is still rampant. And one of the opportunities that this particular allowed is people were talking, oh, you're implementing this particular system, so I'm doing it the same. Can we talk? The culture of norms of resistance became norms of understanding, trust, and adoption of secure measures. And that was one of the key areas that we really wanted to focus on, because in order to change norms and culture, it requires trust, but also requires understanding. It requires strong communication. You can see the mindset change on campus, because it wasn't just me driving a group, it was the group driving other people. It was the group themselves driving and talking with each other, but they also reaching out to their own units in different areas talking about the same topics, bringing awareness to those topics. Again, these particular focus groups had outcomes, tangible outcomes you could actually see. We developed these types of standards. We started working, PHP was rampant on campus, and we all wanted to understand how we secure PHP code. And the group together developed a deliverable for the entire campus. In fact, that particular deliverable started being taken on by researchers who were submitting to the General Research Ethics Boards when they wanted to do their own development. As part of their submissions, they get approved. Those standards started going back to the community and also contributing to the value add in the community as well. And as you can see, this particular one is actually mapped to objectives 3 and 4. How we can continue to influence and change norms and culture, respective of security, but also embed it in a risk-aware culture, such that people would actually consider risk as part of the process. Can you start from the beginning? So what I want to show you, and I want you to keep in mind that I'm mapping outcomes to specific objectives that we started out earlier. Remember I said that you need to measure and also understand where you're going? It's really important to be able to match outcomes with the specific objectives, because it allows you to see that value, that progress that we need to see. In fact, it allowed us to go back whenever we made updates to the Board of Trustees, we can actually show value and value add in terms of the community itself, and in terms of being able to meet some of the things that we wanted to accomplish. Again, outcomes, the duplicate technologies were reduced, efficiencies within the process. As I spoke to you earlier, the challenge is what we wanted to establish through the Community of Security Practice here. There is a bigger picture though. We wanted to establish security assessments and various other elements in terms of policy and standards. But this created efficiency in how we did assessments too, because by that time we were doing security assessments and we didn't have to do it 3 times on the same technology. The same technology managed to create that collaboration to reduce duplication of IT 3 times. We're able to do the one assessment rather than doing it 3 times. So again, additional outcomes, as you can see, allowed us to bring in different topics. Security, the world.
Those, what are the risks, so I can consider them in my decision. And this allowed us to introduce those topics, not specifically only to the group, but also the group as they went back to their own departments and spoke with the researchers and faculty and staff who were waiting to make some of those decisions. As you can see here, we managed also the perception and the organizational impact. Now, it's hard to measure this particular one, but as you can see, there are specific areas that we touched on with the risk-aware culture, the communication, collaboration that actually was created through those relationships that were established, that we can contribute to how that particular impact was changed and how the perception was managed. In fact, one of the key aspects was that communication piece really contributed very strongly to how we managed perception and the dimension of organizational change. Information security, in a lot of ways, it adds efficiency to the process, but a lot of people don't see that. A lot of people see it as a threat sometimes. A lot of people see it as an extra burden they have to do. And it does articulate specific, maybe extra steps that people will do, but what they see downstream is the value add of reliability of their systems, the value add that they don't have to fight a lot of fires, and a lot of things that were proven as a result of that particular process. And hence, perception was actually managed. And in fact, a lot of people started to understand that it's not just a threat, and it's not just the extra 5 steps I have to do every time. In fact, any of the additional steps really contribute to my efficiency downstream in terms of IT delivery in general. And that was a major outcome. The future. Okay, where we are today is we're in the process of trying to see and explore, is there a governance model that we can leverage here? Is there an opportunity for us as we move information security on our campus and as we move information security governance in terms of its structure, would this create an opportunity for us for a governance structure with that particular group or a subset of with decision-making capabilities? Or is it going to be an advisory capacity in relation to information security or a representation capacity? Certainly these are options on the table. We're hoping to continue to explore, but also to continue that collaboration on our campus. And the journey continues. Now, as you can see here, it was quite, we were lucky in a lot of things that happened, but also luck and a streamlined process work together. And the streamlined process and understanding of the human dimension and building that trusted relationships with people was one of the key aspects of how we progressed. The objectives were met if you look at the outcomes. But when you really consider the human dimension, it's really hard to measure sometimes. And how far you've gone until you've continued through the journey. I'm going to open it up for questions, if there are any. Okay. Research groups have often different needs. How did you manage to involve the process? Absolutely. One of the key partnerships that we established was a partnership with the General Research Ethics Board and the Health Research Ethics Board. A lot of them in their own development of processes to approve research needed that extra information security dimension that was totally missing in some respect. So that partnership allowed us to advise those research groups of what some of those safeguards that are needed. Remember, we had to consider many variables as well as part of that process. Budget, skills, people, all of these are factored into what safeguards we are managing to create that healthy balance that needed to be involved. And we worked that balance with the researchers in their own settings, depending on the environment of each setting. I hope that answers your question there. Any other questions? Yes.
Following that question, did you have like a research member involved directly?
Yes, we had, if I understood your question.
Like people that do research but not necessarily IT, but they have something. And did you invite people from the research?
Yes, so what we did is we actually met with researchers specifically, sometimes one-on-one and sometimes over the phone, and we would advise them about some of those, depending on the sensitivity of the data they handled. And also part of the process, the trigger was the General Research Ethics Board process itself, where they had to engage with either myself and legal counsel, and then we would come in on it and advise accordingly. Does that answer your question? Great.
How do you involve groups like privacy and audit, those ones that might have key interests?
Good question. One of the key opportunities this particular forum allowed us is I actually invited the head of internal audit and privacy to speak to the groups and present to them in terms of what the legislation is. And also I complemented what was provided from a legal perspective in relation to IT privacy to advise how IT is impacted through the privacy measures in certain areas where it's driven. So it was a complementary role that we played together, but also I brought in IT audit so that people understand that there's an IT audit over there that also has a plan for the entire campus. And also to streamline the communication, because a lot of times internal audit would develop an audit plan that involves IT or involves security, but there's no flow of communication. And suddenly people are coming in and they're talking to them and they're like, okay, you're gonna be in audit in about a month. We're doing an RFP. So it allowed us to streamline that particular process. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but would you consider integrating even more tightly into that working group? Have you built a lot of relationships between central IT and departmental IT groups so that more tightly integrating?
Before there was a risk management and internal audit were both one department, and what we did is we actually included the risk management as part and parcel of that group. The internal audit was invited sporadically on an invitation basis. A lot of people, because there was a free flow of communication, it was sensitive to a lot of people how internal audit is going to view the conversation in relation to risk. So we needed to be sensitive to some of those areas, so to allow the free of communication and the free flow. And risk management was involved because they were able to advise as well from a risk perspective on a regular basis. Ken? Oh, I'll take Ken if that's okay, and then I'll go back. Thank you.
George, the survey results, were there any surprises in there for you? Because there were a couple things that surprised me a little bit in terms of relative rankings. Pleasantly surprised.
Yes.
To see things like DR and config management show up so high.
Yes.
Our client community tends to think of security more narrowly than we do.
That's very true.
So were there anything in the survey results that surprised you, particularly in terms of, wow, people really care about this, or I would have thought they cared more about that?
To be frank with you, with the backdrop that I gave earlier, in terms of how little information security was existent on campus at the time when we first started that journey, I was shocked when I got to the survey results, because I never realized they actually spoke to a lot of the audit findings they never saw. And it mapped directly to everything as if I was reading the audit report, to some extent, some of it. And at the same time, as you can see, it allowed us in the end of the journey actually meet the audit findings. Does that answer? Okay. Research groups have often different needs. How did you, obviously you are emphasizing the successes and accomplishments, but are there pitfalls you would avoid if you could do this all again and challenges yet to be resolved? Good question. There are some pitfalls and there were some challenges. If I were to do this again, I would probably follow the same process, to be frank. The only thing that I would do different is keep that engagement at the top. You've heard of the tone at the top and how the top management really shapes the norms once they take a consistent stance across campus, and that connection to the top needed to be kept all the time. The challenges we met there were that there was a huge turnover in that particular team and over the number of years that we took to where we are today, and it needed that continued connection with the top. That's probably one of the challenges, and that I think going back I would have done a bit differently. Research groups have often different needs. How did you manage to involve them in the process? The beauty of the group is that they all supported researchers in the different faculty units. And whenever we talked about risk in relation to information security, they actually went back and communicated with them, but also they involved us one-on-one. So we would come into departments and speak in department meetings and departmental meetings. And this allowed us that extra connection where people started to know about us, and we became a focal point for a lot of researchers in terms of when they needed specific, to handle specific risks or to make certain decisions in relation to how they handle data sets, we were there and they knew about us. And they picked up the phone and called. Sometimes it would be called by people who I've never met, and it would be like through the actual department unit representatives as well. I hope that answers your question. Certainly there are a myriad of processes that we integrated in to accomplish the engagement with the research groups. Besides being in the general research ethics boards and health research ethics boards, there are connections with the High Performance Lab for Queens. There was one-on-one relationships that were established with researchers, continued faculty relationships as well. That allowed us, and through the myriad of processes, to tap into the research and inject input into informed decisions at the same time. Any other questions? Garrett.
George, in your future, you talked about one of the possibilities being governance and the group turning into decision making. Do you have currently a governance group for IT in general? And are they involved? Like, would they want you to be a separate governance group just for IT security?
That's a good question. They're all both were burgeoning. The backdrop early on that I gave was that IT or governance in relation to IT and information is really in its early development stage, and it continued. What happened with us is that after about 2 years or 3 years of us in that journey, we were hit by something called PeopleSoft, and that hit everybody. As an ARP system being brought in, it created a huge dimension of impact on a lot of people and changed the priorities for a lot of people. It kind of took us on a tangent to focus on an institutional priority in terms of developing that IT governance on information security governance in relation to IT. And at the same time, once that particular project was finished, we actually connected again, but by that time, we had some turnover in the senior management, and the state where we were in terms of evolving IT governance in general was kind of back to square one back several years ago. So the way we're proceeding is in alignment with IT governance and in cognizant and line of sight of that so that we can converge together and see what that collaboration and that connection can be. Does that answer your question?
And a small, totally different. You said at the beginning you were 30-70.
Yes.
Roughly how are you now?
I believe it's 50-50 now, or 50, a bit even more than 50, but 50-50. Lawrence.
You mentioned about information security governance. Because of the close alignment with researchers and research ethics, how is research governed from an ethics perspective at Queen's? And are you happy with the linkages between the research ethics process and the security process?
The partnership allowed us to see opportunity in relation to where that needs to be enhanced. Am I happy? I would say that there is a lot of work that is needed. It's not where I want us to be, for sure, but there's opportunities, and what we're trying to do is seek those opportunities so we can continue to fulfill that mandate for them in terms of the governance in relation to research. Also, relationship with the Office of Research Services was really fundamental because we connected with their own legal counsels. They have about several who are involved in a lot of IT in relation to research and working with researchers. That connection was fundamental because it allowed us to tap into all the research that goes in through the Office of Research Services. So it's an evolving, and there's certainly a lot of work that needs to be done, and we continue to evolve in that particular. I'm looking for opportunities right now where we can continue to engage more formally in that particular process as well. Chris?
Sure. Can you elaborate on the selection process for the leaders of these various working groups you were talking about, and how that, do they draw straws or
Mhm,
volunteer
mhm.
or demonstrate expertise?
Yes.
What are the issues with that?
There was a mix. I think the group decided that first I threw it to the group in terms of them deciding if there are volunteers that can come forward and lead the groups. And certainly there was stronger, skilled people in the specific areas were targeted by me specifically, but it also allowing it to the group to make sure they're comfortable with the decision that they were to make was fundamental for me in terms of their comfort level of leading the group. So it's a mixture of me targeting the specific individuals, but also asking the community to volunteer on their own. Any others? Yes.
Sure. Would you be willing to share the terms of reference and the tools that you use to engage that group?
Happy to. Absolutely.
Email that to you?
Absolutely. Just send me an email. I'll be more than happy to share the terms of reference and some of the key, the smaller terms of reference for the focus groups, and they're available. You're welcome. Yes, Kevin.
So, resourcing is always an issue. How did you get people's time in this, and how did you make it priority for groups that were outside of IT?
That's a good question. I actually didn't. They themselves did. I invested a lot of time and effort for sure. In any relationship, you really need to invest a lot of time and effort. And with that investment that I made personally, I think the people valued the fact that we are investing so much in working with them, and they also stepped up. They were always saying they were at 100% capacity, but they certainly found the time and they worked it out in their own schedules, and that was the kudos to them in terms of how they managed. I know we're out of time. I want to thank you all for attending today. I wish you a wonderful conference.